The night sky over Drakemount was torn apart by streaks of light. Not shooting stars, but dragons. Their massive silhouettes blotted out the constellations, their wings like sails of war. The wind howled with a strange chill, unnatural for late summer. Far below, in the mountain village of Redfern, the bells rang a frantic warning. Cale Stormrider had heard those bells only once before, when he was a boy. The night his father never came back from the northern pass. He stood now in the village square, sword strapped to his back, eyes locked on the distant glow over the peaks. It wasn't sunrise. It was fire and ice beside him. Lyria Frostbane tightened the straps on her armor. Her white hair, braided tight, shimmered like fresh snow under the moonlight. She was a huntress from the northern tundra, the only person in Redfern who claimed to have seen a frost worm up close and lived to tell it. "They're coming sooner than I thought," she muttered, voice sharp as the winter wind. "Fire to the south, ice to the north. This valley will be the killing ground." Kel's younger brother, Roran, stumbled into the square carrying a pack almost as big as himself. He was barely 20, with none of Kel's battle-hardened calm. "We need to get everyone out of here," he started, but a deafening roar cut him short. The sound wasn't just loud. It was felt, vibrating through bone and stone alike, from the ridge above the village. A wall of frost spilled down like an avalanche. It crystallized the grass in an instant, froze the air itself into glittering shards. A frost dragon was descending, its scales shimmering like polished sapphire, each wingbeat sending hurricanes of snow into the valley. Before the villagers could react, another roar split the sky. Deeper, hotter, a burst of flame lit up the opposite ridge, scorching the trees to cinders. The fire drake emerged, wings ablaze, eyes burning with molten fury. The two dragons locked eyes across the valley. The air between them warped, one side a blizzard, the other a furnace, and then they lunged, dot the shockwave of their clash flattened barns and splintered rooftops. Ice met fire in an explosion of steam so thick it was like night had fallen again. Villagers screamed, scattering in every direction. Kill grabbed Roran by the collar and yanked him toward the old stone keep. Inside the keep's half-collapsed hall, before them, Cale, Lyria, Roran, and an elderly scholar named Thamon took shelter. Thamon's hands shook as he unrolled an ancient map, the ink faded but still legible. This war, Thamon rasped, is older than kingdoms, older than men. The Frostburn and the Flameforged will burn this world to ash and ice alike. But he pointed to a symbol etched in the map's center, to dragons, tails entwined, locked in eternal combat. There was once a time when they were not enemies, Lyria scoffed. "You think they can be reasoned with, those beasts?" "I think," Thamon said, his gaze grave, "that someone has made them fight again." Another roar shook the keep. Dust falling from the cracked ceiling, the steam outside was thinning, revealing both dragons circling once more. Neither seemed weaker, neither would retreat. Kel's jaw tightened. If this is only the beginning, Redfern won't survive another night. Lyria's icy blue eyes met his. "Then we don't wait for them to bring the fight to us. We go to the mountains. We find the one who started this outside." The two dragons dove again, one trailing frost, the other flame, and the valley trembled as the dragon wars began anew. The war front was not a place, it was the sky itself, from horizon to horizon. The heavens were painted into colors, the pale, ghostly blue of frost storms and the deep, molten red of dragonfire. The border between them was not a clean line but a writhing, chaotic rift where heat and cold collided in endless fury. Here, no creature lived for long except the dragons themselves. On the northern edge of the rift, the Frostburn host gathered. Their leader, Vareth the Winter Crown, perched atop an iceberg that floated in midair, held aloft by ancient runes etched into its frozen heart. Her wings stretched wide, each membrane dusted with rime that glittered like diamonds. When she exhaled, the moisture in the air froze into delicate snowflakes that fell upward instead of down, drifting toward the void above. Round her, legions of frost worms wheeled in disciplined formations. Some were silver-scaled and sleek, darting through the wind like spears of ice. Others were ancient, their bodies encased in glaciers, each wingbeat releasing a storm of hail. Their breaths could freeze rivers in a heartbeat. Their claws could shatter stone as if it were glass. Far to the south, the fire-forged host assembled under the command of Ignivar the Ash King. His scales burned with a heat so fierce that sparks danced in the air whenever he moved. His horns curved forward like blades, and every time he opened his jaws, a pulse of orange light rippled down his throat before bursting into a roar of pure flame. The ground beneath his flight path was left blackened and smoking, a scar on the land that would never heal. His army was a storm of heat and fury, fire drakes with ember-filled eyes, flame serpents that coiled through the air leaving burning trails, and great ember wings whose wingspans could eclipse the sun. Each one carried the scent of scorched rock and molten earth, their roars echoing like thunder in the bones of the world. Between the two armies stretched the ash-frost expanse, a wasteland where nothing grew. Every gust of wind there carried both cinders and snow, the remnants of centuries-old battles. Here, the air itself was an enemy too hot to breathe in one heartbeat, too cold the next. Lightning fought constantly above, striking down any foolish creature that wandered into the rift. It was here, on this scarred battlefield, that the first skirmish of the new war began. Varid's voice was like cracking ice as she commanded her. Forward wings, break their line. Freeze their fire before it burns the skies. Ignivar answered with a roar so loud it shattered the upper layers of the clouds. Let the frost burn. The two vanguards clashed in midair with a force that made the expanse quake. A dozen frost worms dove, their breath turning the air into a wall of ice shards. Fire drakes met them head-on, exhaling gouts of flame so intense the ice didn't just melt, it vaporized instantly, exploding into scalding steam that blinded friend and foe alike. One frostworm, Scarif the Gale Talon, tore through the steam and raked his claws across the wing of a young fire drake, sending it spiraling down. But before he could finish his kill, an ember wing slammed into him from above, driving him toward the frozen ground. Their bodies hit the ice with a crack like a mountain splitting apart. In the sky above, Vorith and Ignivar circled each other like rival storms. Neither struck first. They had fought before many times and both knew the other's strength too well. Their eyes locked, each searching for the faintest weakness. Beneath them, the battle raged without pause. Ice storms spun into whirlwinds of flame, creating pillars of boiling steam that rose into the heavens. The ash-frost expanse shook with every impact, the land itself groaning under the strain. And still, neither side gained ground. As the battle dragged on, the sun vanished behind clouds of smoke and frost. Day became night, and the world was lit only by the glow of fire and the shimmer of ice. When the two great leaders finally roared in unison, it was not a call of victory, it was a promise. This war would not end quickly. It might never end at all. The battle had raged for 3 days without pause. Above the ash-frost expanse, the clouds no longer moved as they once did. They were torn into colossal spirals, one turning with the chill of 1,000 winters, the other burning with the heat of a sun. Frost and flame swirled together in a storm that reached the edges of the world, a vortex that swallowed the horizon itself. Neither the frostburn nor the fireforge claimed the skies alone. The air was thick with the roar of wings, the hiss of melting ice, and the deafening crack of fire meeting frost. Every clash carved new scars into the land below on the northern front. Varith the Winter Crown led her guard into the heart of the storm. Her scales gleamed like moonlight on frozen seas, her breath freezing the very air into jagged spears that hung suspended for moments before shattering into deadly hail. Round her, the frost worms moved in tight. Disciplined ox, each formation weaving through the air like a blade of winter. But the southern firestorm was relentless. Ignivar the Ash King dove through the blizzard, his body a streak of molten gold and black. When his claws struck the ice below, rivers of flame split the ground open, sending molten rock spilling across the battlefield. The heat from his wings turned snow into mist in seconds, and the mist into burning rain. The two forces collided. Again, the frost worm named Iskall the Shardwing darted from the shadows of the storm, her talons raking across the neck of a flame serpent. The serpent twisted midair, wrapping its burning coils round her and squeezing until her icy armor cracked. They plummeted together into the expanse, vanishing in an eruption of steam dot above. Varith spotted Ignivar cutting a path toward her flank. She wheeled sharply, her breath unleashing a beam of freezing wind that streaked across the battlefield. Ignivar countered with a column of fire, and where the two met, the very sky shattered. Chunks of ice, glowing red from the heat, rained down like meteors. Still, neither leader gave ground. Far to the east, his strange sound rippled through the chaos. A deep, resonant pulse, like the heartbeat of the world itself. Both armies hesitated for a fraction of a breath, the instinctive pause of predators sensing something greater than themselves. Then the sound came again, louder. The clouds above the expanse split, not by fire or frost, but by something darker. A fissure opened in the heavens, stretching wide, spilling shadows across the battlefield. The air thinned, the wind stilled, and for the first time in centuries, frost and flame alike faltered. Varith's eyes narrowed. Ignivar's growl rumbled. Lo, whatever was coming was not of frost, and it was not of flame. It was something else. The fissure in the sky widened until it consumed the sun. Its edges burned not with fire, but with a strange, sickly light, the color of dying embers and deep ocean trenches combined. From its depths came no roar, no whined, only silence so heavy. It smothered the battlefield, even the blizzards of the frostburn and the infernos of the fireforge thinned, as though the very elements feared what was coming. Varith hovered in midair, wings trembling against a wind that didn't belong to this world. The ice crystals round her melted into droplets that froze again instantly, as if confused by the shifting laws of nature. Ignivar circled below, his molten eyes narrowing. The Ash King had fought in countless wars, burned countless foes, but the air now felt wrong. His inner fire guttered, not from weakness, but from something he did not understand. Then the shadows spilled through. At first they looked like smoke, curling tendrils drifting down from the rift, but they thickened, solidifying into sheep's beasts without true form, their outlines warping like heat mirages. Where they touched frost, it blackened. Where they touched flame, it dimmed. They were not made of ice or fire, but something older, something hungrier. The first of these creatures landed upon the ash frost expanse. It had no eyes, only a mouth that split to wide, its edges dripping with void. The ground beneath it cracked, not from weight, but from the cold absence it carried. Frost worms and fire drakes alike recoiled from it. Varith's voice cut through the silence. Shadow spawn. Ignivar growled deep in his chest. They were myths. The shadow spawn did not attack immediately. They moved between both armies, untouched by flame, unbroken by frost. One reared its shapeless head and released a scream so high-pitched it shattered ice cliffs and split molten rivers alike. The sound tore at the mind as much as the ears, dragging ancient fear from the depths of memory. Then they struck, One leapt at a frostworm, phasing through its icy armor and tearing away a piece of its essence rather than flesh. Another called round a fire drake, extinguishing the flames along its spine until the great beast dropped lifeless to the ground without a mark, for the first time since the war began. Frostburn and Fireforged hesitated. Vareth and Ignivar locked eyes through the chaos. No words passed between them, yet both understood. This was not a foe one side could face alone, but neither leader moved to call a truce. Not yet. The shadow spawn surged, their numbers multiplying as more poured from the rift. Above, the fissure pulsed like a living wound, each beat releasing more darkness into the world. And high within that rift, something far larger was beginning to emerge. The rift pulsed again, harder this time. Each heartbeat sent ripples of shadow across the battlefield, bending light, bending sound, bending reality. The smaller shadow spawn scattered, fleeing from something greater like wolves abandoning the path before a charging titan. Then it came through. First, a claw longer than any dragon's wingspan, black as the void between stars. Its surface moved like liquid metal, swallowing light instead of reflecting it. The claw dug into the sky itself, pulling the rest of its form from the wound in the heavens. A head followed, massive beyond comprehension, crowned with jagged spines that shifted like shadows in a storm. Its mouth was not filled with teeth, but endless dark an abyss within an abyss. Where its gaze fell, frost melted into nothingness, and flame faded into cold ash. The dragons had no name for it. But the air whispered one nonetheless. Amrithar, the world-eater. The frostburn host recoiled instinctively, their breath freezing midair as their hearts skipped beats they could not control. The Fireforged flared brighter, roaring in defiance, yet even their flames seemed muted against the creature's presence. Vareth broke the stillness first. She soared upward, wings cutting through the warped sky, frost trailing behind her in a spiral. Her voice, sharp as breaking ice, rang across the battlefield. Hold the rift, stop it from crossing fully. Ignivar answered with a roar like a volcano's wrath. Without waiting, he dove past her, his molten body a streak of gold and red, aimed directly for the beast's claw. Then we burn it, before it breathes our skies. The two leaders did not speak again, but for the first time, they moved in unison. Frost worms unleashed volleys of razor-sharp ice, aiming for the creatures. Joints, fire drakes, and emberwings rained molten rock from above, igniting the shadow stuff that made up its form. Wherever frost struck, the darkness slowed. Wherever fire burned, the darkness shrieked. But Amrithar did not bleed. It consumed. A single sweep of its claw erased 3 frost worms from existence, their forms dissolving into the void. One great inhale from its absol pulled a fire drake's flames into its throat, leaving only a husk that fell lifeless to the ground. Still, the dragons fought. Vareth spiraled upward, unleashing a storm so dense it froze even the falling. Ash, Ignivar dove alongside her, his fire cutting through the frozen mist, creating spears of steam-hot ice that hammered into Amrithar's chest. The beast recoiled for the first time, a soundless bellow rippling through the clouds. Below, Frostburn and Fireforged formations merged, no longer separated by the invisible line of war. Silver-scaled worms flew wing to wing with embered drakes, striking in coordinated waves. The battlefield, for a heartbeat, became something new, not frost or flame, but both, bound by necessity. And yet, the rift above still widened more. Claws were emerging. The battle for the ash-frost expanse had become the battle for the world itself. The World-Eater had learned. Its first strike had been wild, sweeping at the battlefield without aim. But now its absol gaze fixed onto shapes cutting through the chaos for it, the winter crown, gleaming like moonlit steel, and Ignivar the Ash King, blazing like a falling star, dotted understood something ancient. Destroy the head, and the body will fall. The next pulse from the rift was not merely shadow, it was force. A shockwave of raw absence erupted outward, hurling entire squadrons of frost worms and fire drakes into the ground. Snow and ash lifted together in a blinding storm, masking the beast's movement until its claw struck. Varith twisted away just in time, the edges of the claw grazing her tail. The frost on her scales hissed and dissolved where it touched. Below, Ignivar veered sharply, the ground beneath him folding inward where the claw landed like the world itself had caved under its weight. The two leaders rose high above the expanse, circling each other in the narrow airspace that remained. And touched by the beast's reach, your fire weakens its flesh, Varith called, her voice carrying even through the unnatural silence. But frost binds it in place. Ignivar's molten eyes burned hotter. Then you hold it still, and I'll burn it out of the sky. They didn't need more words. They dove together. Varith struck first. Her wings churned the air into a vortex, pulling the surrounding frost into a concentrated spiral. She unleashed it all at once, a beam of freezing wind so cold it turned the moisture in the void itself into jagged crystal. The frost spread along Umhrathar's claw, creeping up toward its shoulder, slowing its movements. Ignivar followed, his entire body igniting in a flare so bright it burned through the storm. He slammed into the frozen claw, his fire exploding, outward in a shockwave that cracked the frost, but this time the cracks spread deeper, splitting the beast's arm of shadow. The World Eater recoiled, a soundless ripple tearing through the air as fragments of its form scattered into the expanse below. For the first time, the rift above flickered. The battlefield erupted in roars not of victory, but of renewed fury. Both Frostburn and Fireforged surged forward, sensing the smallest thread of hope. Ice and fire struck together, their impacts timed like the beat of a single heart. But the World Eater was not beaten. The claw that had been shattered dissolved into pure shadow, reforming in moments, this time longer, sharper, hungrier, and, from deep within the rift, something worse began to emerge ahead, far larger than the one they'd seen, its spine scraping the edges of the sky. Varith's eyes narrowed, its crossing fully. Ignivar's tail lashed in the air. Then we close the rift now, or there won't be a world left to fight over. Above them, the tear in the heavens beat like a living heart, each pulse bringing more darkness into there. World, the rift beat faster now, like the heart of a predator about to strike. Each pulse drew more of Umhrathar's massive form into the world's shoulders hunched with jagged shadow, spines writhing like serpents, and eyes that burned with hunger for all things living and unliving. Varith and Ignivar hovered at the highest point the storm allowed, their wings buffeted by winds that reeked of both ash and ancient ice. They spoke not as enemies, but as rulers of their kind. "There is one way," Varith said, her breath forming crystal patterns in the air between them. "But it was forbidden long before your fire first lit the sky." Ignivar's voice rumbled, low, forbidden, or forgotten, both. She looked toward the heart of the Frostburn lines. "It is the song of the first flame and frost, the oldest magic our kind ever knew born when there was no war, when frost and fire were one." Ignivar's molten gaze didn't waver. "Sing it, and I'll burn the sky to carry it." They returned to their armies. Orders were given in roars that shook the battlefield, commands that would have been unthinkable days ago. Frost worms wheeled alongside Emberwings, their wings brushing in uneasy alliance. Silver scales gleamed beside Ember Red. Blue eyes met, molten gold, and for the first time in centuries, no claws were drawn against one another. The oldest dragons were called forward. From the Frostburn came Thriss the Glacier Mind, whose wings had cast shadows on the ice long before kingdoms rose. From the Fireforged came Maelgor the Cinderheart, whose roar could shake mountains. Both carried the deep, resonant voices needed. For the song, they formed the circle in the sky, a perfect ring of frost and flame, their breath spiraling inward. The air between them shimmered with an otherworldly glow, neither cold nor hot, but something that seemed to hum in the bones. Very th. And Ignivar took their places at opposite ends of the circle. Their voices rose first, Varith's like the howl of an endless winter, Ignivar's like the roar of a newborn volcano. The others joined, weaving frost's stillness and flame's fury into a single, impossible harmony. The sound carried into the rift. The shadows twisted as if in pain. The air itself began to warp, curling inward toward the song's center. Umbrathar thrashed, its claws striking at the circle. But every time they came close, the frost thickened, the fire blazed hotter, and the path was barred. For the first time, the rift's edges began to shrink, tiny, at first, but shrinking nonetheless. Yet with each note of the song, the strain on the singers grew. Frosted scales cracked under the heat, ember bright eyes dimmed under the cold. The song demanded a price from all who gave it voice. Varith's gaze met Ignivar's through the circle. If we stop before it is done, then the world ends. Ignivar finished. Below them, the armies held the line against the remaining shadow spawn, their roars drowned by the song above. The rift and bled shadow into the air, and then, on the seventh verse, the World Eater lunged its full head and shoulders tearing through the shrinking tier, its absol more indirectly at the circle. The seventh verse had barely begun when the sky split wider with a single motion. Umbrathar's full head tore through the rift, its spine scraping sparks against the edges of reality. The World Eater's maw yawned open, darkness spilling from it like liquid night. The air between the beast and the circle bent inward, as if the entire sky were being pulled into its hunger. Varith felt the pull first. Her wings trembled against the drag, frost flaking from her scales. Beside her, Ignivar's fire guttered, dangerously low, his molten veins cooling in the void's grip. The circle wavered, their harmony twisting under the weight of fear. Then the beast struck, its claw shot forward, faster than any dragon could dodge. The first to meet it was Thriss the Glacier Mind. With a roar that rattled the bones of the world, Thriss hurled himself into the path, his ancient body slamming into the claw. Frost exploded from his impact, coating the shadow limb in Rhimbut. The claw punched through, impaling him midair. His roar became a gurgle, then silence, as the void consumed him whole. The circle faltered, the song stuttered, whole the verse. Varith roared, her voice breaking from the strain. The claw swung again, this time toward Maelgor the Cinderheart. But the Emberwing did not retreat. He dove straight at it, his fire flaring so bright that the shadow recoiled, steam rising where he'd met the void. The cost was instant. Umbrathar's maw snapped shut over him. There was no scream, no ash, only absence. 2 pillars of the song were gone. The circle shook under the loss, the harmony fraying like a torn banner in the wind. Ignivar bellowed across the ring, molten fury igniting every vein in his body. Close the ranks, keep the song alive. Dragons moved without hesitation, frostbound and flame-forged, filling the gaps side by side. New voices rose, raw but determined, weaving themselves into the ancient melody. The sound was rougher now, less pure, but it held. Varith poured the last of her strength into the verse, her frost spiraling tighter, locking round the rift's edge. Ignivar matched her with a surge of molten light so fierce it seared the black from the beast's nearest claw. The rift shuddered. It was shrinking again. But Umbrathar was not finished. It lunged through as far as it could, shoulders and half, its chest forcing their way into the world. Its massive wings unfurled, blotting out what little light remained. Every beat of those wings threatened to tear the circle apart, and yet the dragons held frost and flame locked together in a song that fought the darkness itself. For the first time, the World Eater recoiled. The rift had shrunk to a wound no wider than a mountain's peak. Its pulses slowed, each beat weaker than the last, the edges curling inward as frost and flame sealed them shut. The song of the first flame and frost filled the battlefield, every note vibrating through the bones of the world. Even the shadow spawn faltered, their formless bodies shrinking back into the void from which they'd come, for the first time since the war began. The ash-frost expanse knew a moment without roaring or screaming. It was then that Umbrathar made its choice. The beast stopped struggling against the shrinking rift. Instead, it went still, unnervingly still, its absol eyes locked on the two figures at opposite ends of the circle, Vorith the Winter Crown and Ignivar the Ash King. The darkness in its gaze deepened, and the pull of the void surged again, no longer aiming for the world itself, but for them. The rift would close, but it would close round them. Vorith felt her wings grow heavy, as though the void had hooked its claws into her very soul. Her breath frosted not into crystals, but into black mist that dissolved before touching the air. Across the ring, Ignivar's flames guttered to faint embers, the heat stolen from him in invisible streams. The circle barkled under the shift in power. Gaps opened in the formation as younger dragons broke away, unable to resist the crushing weight of the void. The harmony wavered one missed note. Then, too, Umbrathar lunged. It didn't strike with claws this time. Instead, it unfolded, its entire head and chest poured forward in a tide of shadow, engulfing the space between the leaders. The darkness wasn't a blow, it was a sea, a swallowing flood that promised no return. Without hesitation, Vorith and Ignivar moved toward each other. The frost of the Winter Crown met the fire of the Ash King in a collision of opposites so fierce that the air screamed. For a moment, they weren't two voices, they were one, their song twisting into a single, perfect note that tore through the darkness like a blade. The flood slowed, boiling at the edges where frost and flame met. But the cost was instant. Both leaders burned themselves out, their power pouring into the song with nothing held back. Frost turned to steam on Vorith's scales. Cracks of molten light split Ignivar's armor-like hide. Their roars merged into a single, deafening cry, half winter storm, half volcanic eruption. The rift convulsed, its edges folding inward violently. Umbrathar shrieked not in rage, but in something deeper, fear. And then it struck one final time, the last desperate thrust of a dying god, sending McLaurin to tear through both rulers at once before the tear in the sky vanished. Forever, Umbrathar's final strike cut through the song like a blade. The claw, black as an unlit abyss, was inches from tearing through both Vorith and Ignivar when the rift began to collapse entirely. The leaders saw it in the same heartbeat. This was the end. But whether the end meant salvation or annihilation, no one knew. Vorith threw her wings forward, a wall of blinding frost erupting from her body. Ignivar matched her in the same breath, molten light surging from his chest like a newborn sun. Frost and flame fused in midair, becoming something neither had ever summoned before a radiant storm. Half ice shards, half fire embers, spinning, so fast it screamed. The claw met the storm. The impact shattered the air. Time itself seemed to tear, the sound splitting into silence before crashing back into an explosion that rattled the bones of the world. Frost fire surged outward in a ring that seared and froze everything it touched. Even the void-born hide of the World Eater. Umbrathar recoiled, its roar shaking the collapsing rift. Shadows peeled from its body like dead skin, sucked backward into the nothing beyond. The claw withdrew, but not before one talon carved deep into the battlefield, leaving a canyon of black glass where Earth had been. Vorith and Ignivar hung in the air, barely breathing. The last note of the song left their throats then, trembling. But enough. The circle, what remained of it, took up the echo. The final verse was complete. The rift closed, not with a scream, not with a flash, but with a sound like a single, deep breath. Being released, the sky above the ash-frost expanse healed, piece by piece, until there was only blue, streaked faintly with the smoke of battle. The shadow spawn were gone. The void was gone. Umbrathar was gone. The survivors looked to the two. Rulers, Varid's wings drooped, ice melting along the edges. Ignivar's fire was barely aglow, his eyes dim. They looked at each other, and in that silent exchange, they understood. This war had no victor. The frost fields lay shattered. The firelands were scorched to blackstone. Half the circle had fallen. Their songs forever silent. The World Eater had been cast out, but its mark would never fade. Vorith lowered her head. "We live," she said softly, her voice like the first snow. Ignivar nodded. "We live," he echoed, his voice like cooling embers. Neither spoke of triumph. There was none dot above them. The wind carried away the last traces of frost and flame, mingling in the cold air, inseparable now, just as they had been in the final moment. And in the silence that followed, the world waited, unsure if it had truly been saved, or if the battle had only been the first verse in a much longer song.